Oh, how you doing, Shasta College, Humanities 4, Film Studies? I think we're starting our third week, if I do believe. How you doing on your essays? I haven't started grading yet. I look forward to reading those. I'm a little slow on it. There's a lot of you, and I read them all. Look at my comments, make the changes for the next one. Hopefully, you guys don't need any changes because you're perfect. Anyway, the next movie you're going to watch is Citizen Kane. I'll saying it this week. Essay 3 will be Citizen Kane, one of the most masterful films in the history of movies. I'll be talking about that the next lecture, not tonight. And it takes us into the World War II. World War II. Last I left you off, we were having a bumper year, 1939, perhaps the greatest year in Hollywood's history. The amount of films they put out in that one year has never been matched before. Well, now we're getting into the 40s. Things are zipping along except for a, a nasty element in Europe called Adolf Hitler. He's invading countries, he's gobbling them up for his own delight. He's taking gays, artists, professional thinkers, professors, and Jews, folks, and he's shipping them off into concentration camps. It's called ethnic cleansing, and all sorts of goodies are starting to happen. But we're still not in the war yet. Why? Because Congress won't doesn't want to go to war, and FDR would like to go to help, but his hands are tied. Congress is tying his hands. That all stopped in 1941. Does anybody know what day I'm talking about? Your great grandfather's day. He lived through it. Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor. We're invaded by the Japanese. They destroyed a ton of our ships that were in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. As before, Hawaii was a state, but had our ports down there, and that put us into a world war. After that, it was it was on, folks, and but we weren't prepared for it. Just like we weren't prepared for that sneak attack from Pearl Harbor, we weren't. We had a peacetime army. It was weak. It was out of shape. Didn't have a lot of money behind it. Well, that all had to change, and I mean quick. And how did that change quickly? Through war bonds. Hollywood beckoned the call, and movie stars, directors, everybody started collecting war bonds and asking people to buy war bonds. A war bond was literally a bond that says for $5, you now have a stake in the war. Your $5 is going to go to buy food, ammunition, uniforms for the troops. So people gave, and they gave big time, folks, because the country was totally behind this war. Very few people were against it. Nobody likes Nazis. Nobody liked what the Japanese did. It was a sneak attack, and we've never trusted these two cultures ever since. Although we're friends with them now, that's for sure. But it took a lot of healing on that one. And so Hollywood, which doesn't want to stop for anything, not even a world war, uh, has to keep making movies. Well, they have a job to do. They're making movies to make people not feel so isolated and alone in the world. Our country's isolated. That's why we were never invaded here. We never had bombers coming over to New York City like they did in all the islands in the Pacific Rim, all of Europe. We had two oceans, Pacific and Atlantic, and we had South America and Mexico between us and whatever's down that way. And we were relatively safe. Nobody's going to come through Canada. We were relatively safe, although there was some inroads into, believe it or not, into Alaska. There was. We had troops in Alaska waiting for Japanese invasion. They didn't really come, but they did send some balloons and some other tricky stuff over. We had, if you've been to San Francisco, been out at the beach there and Great Highway, there we had armaments out there waiting for the Japanese invasion to California. We thought was sure it was going to come. We had armaments at Fort Funston. We were waiting for the Japanese invasion and never came. New York City prepared for invasion from Europe, never came, but there was some activity. For example, submarines got into New York Harbor, German U-boats. They didn't do any. They were just there looking around, scouting mission. They were there, folks. They wanted to come, but it was too far in those days away for them to afford it, to build the planes, to have the gasoline, to have the bombs to do it. So they concentrated on bombing the holy hell out of Belgium and France and Italy and Africa, and the war was on big time. Um, and we came calling, and Hollywood came calling big time. They started making propaganda films starring John Wayne and Van Johnson and others who didn't go into the army. They stayed home for whatever reason. Maybe they were 4F, or like John Wayne, he had kids, and you could stay home if you had kids. You didn't have to go into the army. Um, but they made movies here, and that helped the war effort. People believed in these films. They believed in the heroes of these films, and they're essentially being lied to. Propaganda is a big lie, folks, but it was kind of a healthy propaganda. We knew who the enemy was. It wasn't us. It was somebody else. And so, if you watch these movies, the Nazis are really bad. Japanese are really bad. Humphrey Bogart's fighting the Japanese, and Clark Gable's fighting the Germans. Now, in real life, a lot of movie stars, directors, producers, writers actually joined the army, volunteered to go in the army because that's how passionate they were about this war. And there was lots of reasons for that. Um, it was a threat to our freedom of democracy. It's a threat to the world's freedom and democracy. Hey, folks, our democracy is always being threatened. Our freedoms are always being threatened. Now we're being threatened in our own country. But that's another story. I won't go into it tonight. But we knew who the enemy was. It was over there, and we had to go fight it. And so, quite a lot of movie stars quit their careers. Can you imagine Johnny Depp or Brad Pitt walking away from their $50 million a year career to go fight in the Mid East? Didn't happen, folks. Can you imagine Bradley Cooper doing that? I don't think so. Uh, they're going to stay here and make a ton of money and date hot models instead. But that's not how it was in the other generation. They called it the greatest generation, which was my parents' generation. I'm not saying they were so great. They were kind of a pain in the ass. They didn't like my generation because we're hippies and musicians and artists. They hated that shit. They hated our music and our art, but I didn't really hate them. I love their movies. I love their art. I love the fashion. The 30s and 40s, they came up hard in the Depression. We never had that. We've Have you ever gone hungry? Maybe you have. I'm sorry if you have. But most people in America, we have meals prepared. We have a TV. We've got cars. We've got bicycles and motorcycles. But that generation that came up through the Depression didn't have that. And but they gave and they gave because they believed in the USA and what we stood for. And it was a good thing to believe in. So people like James Stewart volunteered for the Army. Clark Gable volunteered for the Army. Tyrone Power. I'm going to show you guys a little documentary. Look at it. It's called Hollywood Goes to War. You'll see who's volunteering for the Army and who didn't volunteer. And the female stars is before females go in the Army. They could go in the Army as nurses and stuff like that. And they did that, but not like combat like you can do now, women. Can finally go into combat with the guys. Um, is that a good thing? I'm not sure. Anyway, but that's another topic. This was then, 1941. It's a long time ago, folks, 84 years ago or something. And most of those people who were alive there are dead now. That entire generation is gone. It is. They'd be 110 years old, if not older. So they're gone, but their legacy still lives, and it lives in the movies, in their literature, and their art, and their music, and their contributions to this country. And they did great work. They did a lot of heavy lifting for us to give us education, to give us a good house to live in. They sacrificed a lot. And in the meantime, they sacrificed in silence. They didn't complain about everything like we do now. If we don't get our lattes on time, or if it's not hot enough, there's not enough whipped cream on it, we bitch un- until the cows come home. We bitch about everything because we can't take any convenience right now. Our cell phone's not fast enough. The car is not going where we want it to go. We want a better car. We want better everything. We want high tech everything. If we don't get it right now, we're upset. I don't envy anybody who has kids right now because their kids are clamoring for the newest technology. Their life is meaningless unless they have it. But that's not how it was with this tougher generation. They didn't have all that stuff. And they were grateful with what they had. Are you grateful with what you have? Are you? I'm not sure. You tell me. I look at TikTok videos. It seems like there's a lot of people out there who are unhappy because they're not celebrities, because they don't have fame, they don't have millions of dollars. They're pissed off without actually earning it. Okay, that's a different story. So, there's a documentary I'd love you guys to watch. I'm going to show you a preview of it. Look for it in modules. It's called Five Who Came Back. Five major motion picture directors put down the camera, put down the script. They left their Hollywood homes, they left their very substantial, well paid careers, and they volunteered for the Army. Now, most of them in that documentary were too old to go to the front line or carry a weapon. They're all in their 50s and 60s. John Ford, Frank Capra, William Wyler, George Stevens, and John Huston was the youngest. Um, they Most of them had won Academy Awards already, and they wanted to do something for the war effort. And so they joined the Army for $58 a month. And Frank Capra was put in the head of the cinema division, which is proper. That's what he knows. And so he hired all these cinematographers and these other directors to direct documentary films. And so this is long before video, this is long before cell phones or iPhones, whatever the hell they are. They had to film it old school 16 millimeter, heavy equipment, black and white, no sound. And he sent them out to the war zones. Have you ever seen Private Ryan? Well, all that footage that they copied was copied from real footage made on D-Day. And there was 100 or so cameramen on D-Day. A bunch of them got killed, folks. Their cameras were lost at the bottom of the ocean. They were slaughtered along with the rest of them, but some of them got their films out there, and the footage is scary and dynamic. And you've probably, hopefully, seen some of this footage over your years of watching documentaries on WW2. Maybe you have never seen it, but maybe you have. And why John, why Frank Capra was in the D-Day in Europe with George Stevens. John Ford was in the Pacific with other filmmakers like John Huston, and he filmed the Battle of Midway. It was a defining battle between battleships, our navy against Japanese navy, where we we destroyed them. And he's got it on film, folks. His cameramen were filming it all, and They had things called newsreels in those days. They didn't have nightly news like we do now. They didn't have television, folks. They had radio. And some people became very famous for being on the radio, broadcasting the war, the news in the war. But they had to film it, these newsreels, and they had to edit. And how you see these newsreels was in the movie theater. You went to see your double feature, you'd have a movie, a B movie, and you'd have a cartoon, and you'd have a newsreel. That's what you got. Your 50 cents got you a lot of product. And that's the only way you saw live, relatively live footage from the war. But what you saw was heavily edited. They weren't allowed to show dead bodies, at least not American dead bodies. They could show briefly the enemy's bodies, the death, but not any blood. Not you can't get too real. That stuff was deemed too graphic for on it. Still is, folks. Have you seen any graphic footage from Afghanistan or not much? They still edit that stuff out. Um, we still in Vietnam. You see some casualties, American casualties, not just Vietnamese casualties, which there's a lot. 50,000, over 50,000 of our guys. That's my war, Vietnam. 50,000 of our guys, over 50,000 died. Kids, 19, 18-year-old kids died fighting that ridiculous war. But we killed over 1 million Vietnamese people, blew them to hell and back. Not just the soldiers, folks, the civilians. We carpet bombed Hanoi and elsewhere. Um, we take a lot of casualties. Anyway, that's another war. I'm not talking about that war. We're talking about World War II. That's where we are in our cinema history. So I'm going to assign Citizen Kane this week. Look for it. I'll talk about it in detail the next lecture. Um, look at these little documentaries. I'm going to show you the previews for Five Came Back. Those directors that went and fought for their country, and most of them were in retirement age. It wasn't easy for them. John Ford was even wounded. He even got a Purple Heart. He was filming on a battleship, and shrapnel came up from a kamikaze pilot that hit his boat, and he was wounded twice. He was very proud of those wounds. He left his family at home. Paychecks stopped. Hopefully, they had some in the savings. Some of them didn't. He was a huge director. So was Frank Capra. But other people like John Huston, George Stevens didn't have that big bank account. Um, they were hurting to support their families and back there in Beverly Hills. But they did it because for the cause, to fight Nazism and to fight the Imperial Japanese Army who did a horrible sneak attack on sleeping America. And it's like the main Japanese general, after they blew up, it's a famous quote. And he said, "We've woken a sleeping giant, and boy, did they wake us up." Because we went into war like we've never gone into anything else since then. We cranked up the war machine through the war bonds, raising millions of dollars an hour to build armament, planes, tanks, ships. Well, who built all that, folks? Because the men all joined the army or got drafted. Women. First time in our history, women went to work in the men's jobs. They 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 made the ships, they made the machine guns, they made the army tanks, and they had a term for these women. They were called Rosie the Riveter. And for the first time, women were working with this so-called man's job. They were no longer housewives or secretaries or nurses or teachers, because that's what they were supposed to be. Good women who just stayed at home, raised the kids, while the husband went out and earned the money. Now these women went to work and they saved the America as we know it by putting out all this armament. And within months, we had state of the art equipment. And we went up against, when we finally went up against Japan, we destroyed it. Eventually, we destroyed it all by dropping an atom bomb on it. That's another story. And we went after Hitler with everything we had. And started in Africa, went to Italy, France, Belgium. My dad fought through all that. We chased Hitler up to his tower. We chased him to his secret hideout until he put a bullet in his head like he should have. Not before he destroyed an entire generation of Jewish people or his own people also, because we carpet bombed Germany into non-existence. Anyway, that's a different story. I'm talking about Hollywood movies right now, but that's what's going on in the culture. It's pretty dramatic. So check out those documentaries. They're brief. You'll have fun looking at them. Keep working on your other paper. I think it's due this week. Your second essay about It Happened One Night or Public Enemy. Hope you didn't have to. Hopefully you got a cheap copy or you got a free copy. My intentions isn't for you guys to pay for anything, but sometimes you got to. And we're saving money by not driving out to college every day. We're saving it, and we'll put it in films, which it should be. Okay, so that's it. Keep up the good work. You know how to get a hold of me with your issues if you have any. And I look forward to reading your papers. See you in a couple days when the story film continues.